Hello, happy May, we're ready now to play. Flowers bloom, the sun is bright, it's such a lovely day.
Remember the days of the old schoolyard? We used to laugh a lot. Oh, don't you remember the days of the old schoolyard? When we had imaginings and we had all kinds of things and we laughed and needed love, yes I do. Oh, and I remember you.
And now on PG Podcast Network, it's time for the Year-Round Carnival with Vince Accardi and your host, Racetrack Ralphie.
Bit of Cat Stevens to roll us in because it's education time. This is the third of our year-round carnival specials. While the horses are a bit slow and so's the tracks, let's do a bit of learnings over the last 2 weeks. If you've missed it, the Melbourne Horse of the Year, the Sydney Horse of the Year, and this week we're just going to talk about all types of fundamentals from the start to recent innovations with Vince Accardi from Daily Sexuals. Good morning, mate.
Good morning, Ralphie. Good morning.
Never hurts just to do a little refresher.
No, I like the intro. That's really brought me back when I was young, that song.
Well, you wouldn't believe it. I was going to ask this just as a bit of a basic, and one of our members had chimed in because, of course, we always get our members to contribute if they want to. Warren's asked a question I keep having, and maybe you can answer it rather than going into a deep examination on the pod. No, we're going into a deep examination. Warren, what is benchmark? Is it the average median performance over tracking distance for all races in the database, or a measure of what Vince thinks is a standard performance required? Hope it isn't too obvious a question. We love obvious questions. What are we doing, Vince? Benchmarking. What was the basis for your work?
Yeah, well, I have to say, what's really interesting is when you go through the past 4 decades, I just find it funny, like how many people now have benchmarking.
Yes.
Never used to want to do it, but now they've got to do it. Some want to try and emulate what we do, whatever it is. I just find that really fascinating how people, particularly in Australia, I'd say is the main place that everyone wants to come up with benchmarking. Whether it's the same, slightly different, it is interesting. I do find that interesting. The shift about ratings to benchmarking. And the benchmarking's designed first and foremost on sectional times and nothing but sectional times. And I have to start, before I just break apart the whole benchmarking, it's pure sectional times. It doesn't have any evolution of putting in weights or other metrics added to the benchmarking. It's just about time. And the philosophy is a very simple one. Over the years, on metro tracks in Melbourne and Sydney, it's about 4 decades old, Ralphie, where what we started with, and hasn't changed, is the first 4 horses across the line. If the tracks back in the old days used to be, if they're better than if there was a dead 4 or faster, is what I should say, they would become part of the benchmarking process. So what happens is, if you run at 1,000 metres at Flemington and it's on a good 4, first 4 horses across the line would become part of the benchmark into the future as faster or slower. In other words, above standard or below standard based on those 4 runners. And then each time there's a 1,000 metre race run at that track and distance, as long as nowadays it's a G4 or faster, you become part of the benchmark. Again, if it's a slow track or a heavy track, it's not part of the benchmark.
And I guess the philosophy there is quite simple. You need it. You're not going to have context if you have, let's say a run of wet tracks, and you're including those runners. Well, then you're not going to have the context of how much slower that track is.
No. So the only modification that's sort of taken place is when you stack all this data on top of each other, band widens, and what I mean by widens is I've seen that some horses can be more than, say, 20 lengths below benchmark, and that's on a track surface that's nowadays good for or faster. And occasionally you might get the odd scenario where it could be in excess of 18 or 20, although I haven't seen that in modern times. Now, I have to preface, though, if I go back, say, 2 decades, or a bit longer, I wasn't intelligent enough to understand that. Could you really believe it? The distances might be wrong. I definitely understood that the times could be wrong, and I definitely understood the fact that sometimes the rail running markers that have been in place for a couple of decades, I should say, well, a lot more than maybe not 20 years, but definitely been around for probably 15. They might be wrong, but I never really thought 25 years ago that maybe distances would be wrong. What I've learned more modern times, been fortunate enough to get the right vision racing bodies, that we started to understand that there's a real discrepancy sometimes in the distance, and this then can cause this catastrophic outcome in terms of going well past what a benchmark should be, like in excess of, say, 20 lengths above benchmark on raw figures. That's not to say that there hasn't been any real realities where that may have happened, because we also got to understand a long time ago, Ralphie, they used to allow you to put up fast 2. They don't allow you to put that up today, but I'm pretty confident that there are days when that happens. So these are the variations, the simple variations. And why they are isolated in distance is not so much about just trying to get the fundamentals, because this is, when we say the first 4 horses across the line, not only are you taking the final time, but what you're also taking, the most important part, is those incremental sectionals. From the 8 to the 6, 6 to the 4, 4 to the 2 to the finish line, and examining and really honing in on what the variation is in amongst those splits, to see whether there's proper efficiency from riders, or whether there's efficiency in terms of their fitness cycle, their distance cycle. And then, of course, have the arbitrary standard process where we put it in 3 blocks. To the 800 is 1 block from the start to the 800. And all races, they're all normalised to a mile, Ralphie. So we normalise all the distances to a mile. So that allows us to capture distances that go all the way out to, say, realistically 2,000 metres. Once you get past that, it's a little bit different. And it helps you to normalise and indirectly examine, let's say, a 1,000-metre race versus a 1,200 or 1,400. And this is just purely for overall IVR figures, to see how they can rank and score. And this is another thing, Ralphie, the whole ranking process with the benchmarking. No one used to do it, and now everybody likes to do it. I find that, again, really crazy how that happens now. So perhaps sometimes people just like to do it because they feel they need to do it, or requested to do it, or perhaps they understand what we understand, is there's real insight in the ranking, because some days there's slow days because of weather, could be very wet grounds, and the ranking actually plays a big role. Who's the best performance of the day? Those top 10, or even 15 or 20, depending on how big the meeting was on the day, can have real meaning into the future and help crystallise the benchmarking. This is all about the benchmarking. And why I keep it in their isolated distances is the energy distribution that horses have to do at various points in races at different distances distribute different numbers. And it's unfair that if you just use the data and just said, okay, everything at 1,000 metres or whatever it is on the day, we're all going to have the exact sectional split times to be benchmarked across in every single split. It doesn't then allow or cater for the various distances. And this is why I felt, and of course, in the early days, it still was a bit of an experiment. I wasn't sure if that would be any good or not. But what it does is it really showcases what the true performance is, and ultimately what it does for me is I put it through the lens of a trainer. If I've got a horse and I've raced it over 1,200 metres, it's nice to know how does that stack up with the past, say, 20 years of horses that have raced there at that distance and track on similar ground conditions. It's just nice to know. Was it the performance, sometimes the clock's slow? Was it because they went too slow early? And that's why you couldn't get a quick time? Or did they go really fast? And then, the benchmarking also helps you to understand why sometimes horses don't turn up at their subsequent run, Ralphie. And this happens often. And a lot's got to do with their performance in that prior race. Not everything, but sometimes a horse can have an off day. But generally speaking, a lot of it's got to do with how they went into that last race, and if it was first up and it was a gut-busting performance where they went super hard and fast, and they may have ran first or second, and you have confidence in wanting to step into them next time, the benchmark is indicating, based on the history of all the years, this went way too fast, 10, 12 lengths faster than the standard, and therefore is going to dramatically impact that horse or several horses in that race at their subsequent start. And there's a lot of caution. Instead of just, if you look at a rating, you see a strong rating or even a strong benchmark, and you have this confidence to want to step in. And I used to do this, Ralphie. I'd get a high figure and I'd be all over it at the next start only to lose my money. It's because I didn't understand what it all meant. And this has probably been the big unraveling, is the understanding of what everything means. So you can have a benchmark, but unless you know what it means and how to apply it, and this is something that you and I try and do every week when we come on the podcast, is try and express that information so everyone gets a better understanding, just like you've done with barrier trials and many other things, just squeezing that out to give isolation and, given that focus about performance. And this is, I guess, the reason why I've adopted this process of benchmarking, which is, Rolfie, I've been doing it since I was in my 20s.
So just to underline then, if you're looking at a Flemington 1,400 metre race, it's Flemington 1,400 from the barriers to the 800, that track, that distance, and you just layer it. So that's the simple side of the benchmarking. And then as we said, there's more layers to it. And one of them being the mid race. And when I remember back in the RSN days, I was working, and one of the things that Dean Lester pointed out that you brought into racing that never really had happened before was the importance of the mid-race measurement. Now, previously, historically, and very, very smart punters, and if you can, remain on top of your craft for a number of years, you're a smart punter, were always from the barriers to the 600 and then the last 600. What made you go from the barriers to the 800, measure the 800 to 400, and then the last 400? So, in other words, instead of splitting our race into two sections, you split it into three.
Yeah, well, the challenge is, and the reason why I felt this is, again, deep diving into all the different facets of why people and other punters before me, or even while I was on the journey, would use and have so much belief in the 600. Outside of Victoria, pretty much every other state had the 600 metre timing for all races. The way people were using sectional times, and many of them still do it even today, like to have the par time. So they were able to get the final time, and they would have an anchor, a 600 metre time, so they would then be able to interpret through the video watching and get some sort of sense, if the pace, particularly if you're collecting it, some sort of sense about what the speed was like to the 600 metre mark, and then what was it like over the last 600, so they can better understand and gauge and measure performances of horses. And this was pretty much happening right across Australia, excluding Victoria. Now, Victoria started using the 600 metre time split and providing it to the general public probably around 15 years ago, when I started to provide it to them. This is when Daily Sectional started providing it to the VRC. And then they would put it up. And then that would allow at least the normal recreational person or the more invested type of punter to also be able to do that, instead of trying to find another way to get that 600 metre time. So this is what stood in time and in place for such a long well before. I don't know exactly, Ralphie, when the 600 time actually first ever came in. I can't be certain of that, but my recollection is for as long as I've been seeing it, I've seen it there. And then probably in the last, my scenario about the 3 sections was, again, if I'm normalising things to a mile, it's getting worst case scenario half the race. I wanted to then, be able to create a tool that could do some mapping. And so I found that if I was going to the 600, it would have some problems. Now, if you were running in races that were, say, 900 metres, 1,000 metres, 600 metres is great. Probably in some cases might be better than to the 800. But as you got longer, so what happens is in the background, even though we come out to the general public and we officially say the 1S's to the 800, that allows for all the tools and having metres per second to generate a map, a speed map. What we actually do in the background is we also capture, obviously, the 1,000 metre time where pertinent, the 1,200, the 14, and even the 1,600 metre time. So we can create in the back end like 4 blocks of MPS figures, so we get to see the race in a much better lens. In other words, instead of just looking at a small portion of the race, like, can you imagine a 2,000 metre race and you're only now looking at the 600 to the finish or the start to the 600, you might have a distorted view of what's been happening in the race. In other words, did they go really slow first and they went really fast in the middle, or did they go fast and they actually started to tank out by the time they got to the 1,000 or the 800, and then by the time you get to the 600, they're all legless, as an example. Also, the other challenge is when you're then trying to use it to grade the track condition on the day. If you're just using that one pinpoint with the final time, I felt that it had way too many flaws, and when I tried to use it, it was not workable. So hence the reason why the adoption of having at least to the 800, a bit more of a view, and then because we can score from the 12 to the 8, it gives us a big picture, at least for races up to 2,000 metres.
And with the 3 sections, what I like calling it is using the V analogy. In other words, so if you're going fast and then you drop anchor, it's a negative for a leader. But if it's an inverted V shape, so an upside down V, if you're going fast and then faster, good luck if you're out the back. That's what race shape really means. And race shape's probably another phrase that's probably come into the jargon over the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, well, race shape and like lane bias, that they've all come into the jargon of general communication. It's all spawned from where we started, Ralph. Because no one used to talk about any of these things because they didn't know. It's not that they're not intelligent or anything, they just didn't know. Bringing the tools out to show people. And I have to profess that this 3-sectional setup was actually what I adopted from Howard Sarton. Even though he did it in a different format, he actually was the first person that I'm aware of that ever started in that way, and he put his philosophies and theories why he did that.
That's in the US,
yeah. What he didn't have was he didn't bring in the 4-sectional play like we do, and back then the art of being able to time every horse, although what they used to do is, like in the USA, they would have the beams at each of the key points, then there would be a photo printout, and then they would get that and they get the ruler out, and they were able then to use a calculation of what every horse did based off what that beam data point was at right in that 600 or 800 or 1,000 metre mark. So he used that philosophy, and that was all about so he could understand like turn speed, and of course energy distribution was something that Howard Sarton was already big at, and he'd already been using that type of philosophy for, I would say, probably maybe sometime close to when I was already born. So he was already so far ahead of anybody else. Again, it was a bit more rudimentary, and we've been able to sort of take it to a different phase, but he was the first person to give me the understanding about why he did that. And the power of that is so you can understand the race a lot better.
Well, actually, so you've mentioned someone who's way ahead of his time. And this sort of leads me to a broader discussion about the mid race, because one of the things I identified when I first started working with you, nearly 15 years ago now, and I was privileged to have had a little position where I was working with the late great Bart Cummings, and I added the two, and this was the mid race, because how often did we see a Bart Cummings Cup horse out the back do nothing, out the back do nothing, out the back do a little bit, and then be set to win a Caulfield Cup or a Melbourne Cup, or third, fourth, fifth up, that they then really came to play, and you thought, how did it improve so quickly when visually you're watching it and you really didn't see much? But the mid race, that was measuring that actually it was doing a lot from the 800 to 400, and it was impossible to the eye to see that. But that's what I'm saying, that Bart was so far ahead of his time, and you could probably say Chris Waller's probably more similar to his school. But the power of the mid race moves, particularly early in the prep, they're fitness builders, aren't they?
They are, Ralph, and this is one of the beautiful things that when we, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but probably for 4 or 5 years at least, or maybe longer, you used to run every year, I don't know, a crown.
Yep.
And you had the ability, because obviously Bart Cummings was no longer there for that, right? But you had the ability of being able to get the intel. And the main one that you used to find all the time was Chris Waller, about emphasising the power of the mid-race squeeze and how it just looks like a normal run. But then when you bring that lens in, you'd say, wow, what a powerful run. And then in most cases, they would then come out like fourth up or whatever and run extraordinarily well, if not win, right? And this was all through that prism, and you would show it. Like, here he is, he's out the back, he's made this big move, he's still finished 6th or 7th, so you sort of not really got him in your picture, right? But his move's been so big in the squeeze that he's gotten so much benefit from the run, whether it's 10-length squeeze, 12-length squeeze, 15-length squeeze, which is, getting up near 3 seconds. It's massive. And this is, again, the power of how you can then tune them up and get them ready. And Mr. Waller is been, like, without question, one of the great masters that, and deliberate in his tactic. Like, it's a deliberate tactic that I want you out the back, right quiet, we're having a building run, and this is where we're going to put the exertion in. And I'm happy if the horse just finishes 5th or 6th, because we're going through a campaign targeting a race.
So I like using the analogy, if you're driving on a highway, is it easier to get to 110 kilometres an hour if that's the speed limit if you're going 100 or if you're going 80? Obviously, it's easier from 100. So if you're only going 60 or 80 kilometres an hour and you have to get to 110, you have to really put your foot down on the accelerator, and it's going to take you longer to get there. And that's what the mid-race effectively is. It's a measurement of your pickup of speed, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And it does allow you to see where a horse is in its fitness regime. And this is one of the reasons why Dean Lester used to love using it, and how you found so many horses where they could spiral up in improvement because of that. And that's just one data point in many to help us better understand how to do form on a race, on a runner.
So you mentioned a little three-letter phrase there, and I'll put the reverse gear onto it. MPS. Now it's meters per second, and it's an important tool as well as far as the overview of benchmarking, because traditionally, I suppose, if you saw a horse run really fast time on a firm track in the summer, you go, oh, well, it's only, what would you expect? It's a benchmark 78 or a benchmark 84. It's not a stakes race. But now with the proper tools, you can say the reason it's not as good is because once you allow for how fast that track was playing, it then puts the context. So just talk us through more about the meters per second and the art of trying to adjust raw times, as you call it, to an adjusted IVR time to give you a truer picture of what the ability of that particular performance was.
Yeah, well, firstly, it's one way of not only being able to better utilise tools for benchmarking, it's a great tool to help generate and create speed mapping. It's also another great indicator on, you would see, even in this modern day, like you might get let's say a Saturday Metro Triple S might put up, because they cover that meeting with sectional time, putting aside whether the data is accurate or not, just that's irrelevant. They might say a horse has gone an extra 7 metres or 5 metres or whatever it may be the horse has done in terms of start to finish. And let's assume that that is accurate. How do you use that, right? How will you use it? So if you're using metres per second, so we create a MPS margin background as well. What it allows you to do is if you're timing it through metres per second from start to finish, sure, we also isolate it in the various blocks so we can have benchmarking to create mapping. It also gives us insight about potentially where they should have finished. Now, I'll give you an example. Let's say race 1 Caulfield on the weekend. A horse like, say, Glasgow Lass. If you look at the margin, the horse got beaten 3.8 lengths, right? If you then use the metres per second, we actually have that horse should have been beaten, all things are equal, 3.5. Now, it doesn't sound like much, 0.3. But this is another scenario that you get when you're using metres per second because you're actually tracking the horse for every metre all the way from start to finish, even though you're not physically getting the every stride in metres per second, but by the time you go from the start to the finish, you've got the collective and then it's broken down. You can then apply what the margin potentially really should have been if things were perfect or as even as they should be. And sometimes it'll be more pronounced if there's blocks and checks and various things like that. So this is a way where you can use the tools, but I predominantly personally like to use it for the guidance in generating a map. And the maps are, I started doing the mapping, Ralphie, as we know with the race speed profile. Probably not a lot of emphasis is put on it because it's just there and you look at it. It allows you to see a number of pitches. Number one is that early speed. And the early speed isn't the gate speed the first couple of 100 metres. It's the understanding of what happens when you get to the 800 metre mark. And then we have a midsection, and that midsection changes depending on the distance, what their capacity and capability is in the middle under the circumstances of today's race. And then we have a late closing speed. So, and this is all, we're able to do this because we're using metres per second. But what we do is, of course, it's not a linear scenario where it's just flat and it just runs. If it's 1,000, it's just the 200. No, if it is 1,000, we're just looking at the late closing speed of what? Some people say, it's got to be the last 400 metres. Yes, it is. But if it was, say, 1,600 metres, we're using the late closing speed of the last 800, not the last 400. Because we want to understand like what their sustained capabilities. And there are a number of tracks around Australia. Now, I only these days just focus on the metro, so I'll be out of school if I start talking about provincial tracks and things like that. But we take, let's say, for a track at Randwick as an example, the mid-race is so powerful. A lot of horses find it difficult to handle their capabilities in the right manner at a track like Randwick because of the additional pressure that gets applied in the race, particularly between the 800 and the 400. This does not suit every horse. You can see the weakness and the exposure if you're examining the middle section of that horse's capability and you have a blueprint on it. And that can sometimes give you an advantage. Of course, there's still a level of predication around the pace. If the pace is even, just slightly slower, or just even slightly faster, that can create a real lot of trouble for a whole group of horses, let's say at that track. And then Sandown will have its own characteristics as well. As not only you got a downhill, then you got to have an uphill. That can impact a lot of horses. So this is basically some basic understanding about how we're using metres per second. But myself, I love using it for, number one, to generate these maps. Number two, it allows me to establish the benchmarking for each of the sections. And then lastly, I like to see how far is the variation in margins, and in modern times, like in the analytics platform that we use, Ralphie, we've got now the race matrix and things like that. I actually utilise the metres per second for the margin adjustments and not what's officially given. So then I can put more emphasis on really making it all about the sectional times as opposed to bringing in any other element.
So just a bit more on the on how to adjust a race when, like I said, if it's in the middle of summer and it's a rock hard track, you can say that 1:09 over 1200, for instance, is actually not as good a performance as 1:11, on a soft track. Now that seems logical, but I'm just asking about your process of saying, okay, the track on the day we've got to adjust these times down, or the track on the day we've got to adjust these times up. Obviously, if they're wet tracks, and how do you go about that?
So in the early days, I used to just have and you would be aware of this, Ralphie, when we first met and we were doing things on the radio station with the show, there'd be just an overall IVR figure, and it would be coming, and it was just the raw number. And I just personally just used the raw number for such a long time, and I would just make assessments and judgment calls on, because that would give you the insight about what the ground conditions like. So if it was a +10, the track's fast, right?
Yeah.
Or there's wind assistance. And if it was a -20, and especially if you go through the car, you don't just go one isolated race. You might say to yourself, well, there's no way that's a heavy track, right? And this is how I would use it. And then I would choose to use pieces of the data or not. Then when I sort of made it a bit more active and more people would use this information, I found that it was a big challenge. How do we use that number, the raw number, into a future race? And that was fair. So we brought in the second layer of the tool, and that's the IVR adjusted figure. And adjusting and normalising everything for that day. So if the track was racing too fast, we'd make an adjustment, because there might be big wind assistance, or they're all winning in lanes where the track's typically 2, 3, 4 lengths faster, which can happen, especially if you're up the straight. It can be really big, and therefore you can retune the overall performance of the figure, and it's based on what's happened on the whole day, and looking at the lead speed of each race, and then looking at the horses. I typically like to look at the 3 or 4 horses across the finish line, to give me that understanding of, okay, this track is definitely raced faster or slower on the day. And then, of course, when the slower ones are a bit easier, because you can just see it and you can make the bigger adjustments, and then that allows you to weaponise, let's say, from a raw figure to an adjusted figure for future events. It's still, I found, and again, I'm still learning, as crazy as it sounds, by no way do I feel like I've arrived at a place where I truly understand everything. I actually don't. Sometimes I feel like I'm an idiot. How can I not know all this after all these years, right? How stupid could I be? This is what I say to myself. How am I learning all these things still? You would think 4 decades you should know everything. I obviously know a lot, but there's still a lot more to learn. And this comes, number one, it is one of the most difficult things that I've found is to do adjustments. It looks easy, but it's extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. And this is why we introduce now the race matrix, is to help improve on that. Because what happens is this, Ralphie. You take the raw figure, that's one. Then we make an adjustment. Well, that's in that moment, right on that day. Who's to say, this is again self-looking inwards and saying, well, I'm like everybody else. Just because I have that number there, I don't sit there and say, that's the absolute number. I sit there and say, is that number going to work for me today? Is that horse going to deliver on that number? Oh, but what happens if I adjusted it too much or not enough? Because in the early days, when I used to adjust them, I would go out and want to back that horse and just only found that I was losing my money because I was too aggressive. I gave it too much, and I don't know, if it was a subconscious thing that was coming into play, or some other ego element, or because I might have backed that horse, I feel that I should, this is what I mean about how it makes you feel stupid, right? You think, but what are all the avenues? So this is a lot deeper than what one thinks. is you have to really look inward, and you have to work on yourself. People talk about, you gotta do shadow work. This is what that's all about, is working on you to understand what are you doing wrong first. Because when you can know what are you doing wrong and criticize yourself and break yourself down, you actually start to have a better knowledge, not a complete knowledge, a better knowledge on how to improve your performance and bring a better expression of a number. So this is what I realized. And then it took 4 years to develop something that looks simple. Again, in the platform now, we have this on a press button scenario where we can look at the last 6 leading runs, and we can have a race matrix about how that race is trending, and gives us a lot better insight. Is the performance of the adjustment trending better or worse? And that then creates, like, from an engineering point of view, the scale from one extreme to the other, the band. And this is now the blueprint. You start knowing, okay, well, on its best day, this is what we can have an expectation. Okay, there's a one outlier. Why? Maybe that day there, the track was extra fast, probably needs to be downgraded another couple of lengths, maybe. Or it was just a freak run, which sometimes we see, right? Because it was run such at a hot pace through all the sections, which don't normally happen, and we get this spike figure. But generally speaking, we then also understand, like, what their low side is, and we start to form that range. And this is why sometimes when we do the podcast where people can pay and we pull apart races, Ralphie, and you say, okay, here's the hurdle rate. The hurdle rate for this race is a length above standard or a length below standard. This then allows us, does the horse fit that criteria? And if the horse has never gotten, say, within a length or length and a half of that, it's unlikely they're going to get there today unless a whole bunch of horses don't perform. And this is part of the art form of why I brought in the adjusted figure, and now I've got the race matrix. And, as I sit here with you, or, not directly next to you, I'm sitting here saying, well, I'm still learning all about that, because the race matrix is now in its second 2 seasons. Yeah, probably 2 full seasons now where I've been able to work with the race matrix, and I'm still learning about that, about how I can be more decisive, where I can use it to my advantage, and the advantage is to have better insight, and moving away completely the art form and the expression of your own consciousness, bringing this into play, your own ego, the things that you carry, which no one's really sitting there, Ralphie, other than, I backed this horse, and 2 weeks later, it got blocked, it got checked, and you're going to be all over it next day. And sometimes it pays off. A lot of the times it doesn't pay off. It doesn't deliver. You do the form, and it's amazing. And I say this because I got first-hand experience, right?
Yeah.
How you just gravitate to that horse so quickly, and you want to look at how you can eliminate all the others. And I have learnt the art of understanding how easy it is to eliminate the others, especially if you've already transfixed on that horse that you lost the money on last night. But how do you stop yourself from doing that? How do you stop that? Because if you think about it, that's where your losses come from, is not knowing how to stop that part of you. That's one of the ways.
So just with the matrix, I'll just step forward a little bit, because I was going to talk about the matrix later, but because you've opened the door, I'm trying to bring it back. If people are listening to this early and they're going, what are you on about? I'll put it this way, and you can tell me if right or wrong, but with the matrix, and it's showing the leading performances of all the runners, and that gives you a layer of comfort to say, okay, how strong is this race, or how weak is this race? And compared to the old days, it would be, it's Frank the form. And well, some people still, of course, use it. And that could simply mean that in a subsequent run, a horse wins a terrible race, or maybe the second and third horse does as well. So you go, this is a much stronger race because the second and third horse both went and won. Well, they might have won rubbish races. So it's just the importance of seeing the times and the performances of all horses in their lead-ups and in their subsequent runs. That gives you the true indication of a strength of a race, not just the first, second or third position.
Yeah, so then what happens? You're right, Ralphie. So you get that lens of the 6 leading runs, and then you also got the ability, moving into the future a little bit, especially, and this is very pertinent for young horses where they've only had one start, and you look at the back six, there's none, right?
Yeah.
You can look at, in the race mates, you can look at the forward three runs. And you can start to recrystallise and reshape and make that adjustment to that horse. If it was a 5 length below standard, and now really it's more like a 2 length below standard, as an example. But again, even that, when you look at the 6 leading runs, I always say, like even to the boys when they're doing the form, the people that I speak with, you also got to remember there's a bunch of numbers, and there might be 8 or 10 horses in this race, and you're looking at their prior forms, and it's giving you a distribution of data, some averages. You have to understand it doesn't mean that all of a sudden becomes perfect, because some of those horses might have been first up in their cycle, they might have been at their wrong distances, they could have been on the wrong ground conditions, so you can't just take it as a verbatim. It's just another guideline to help strengthen your number, but it's not the definitive absolute, because this is one of the things that I've learned with so many people that I've spoken to over the years, where we break down and we do form work, Ralphie, is, and probably was the same, I don't know. You like everything to be like very clinical. This is the process and this is the steps, and you just got to follow these fundamentals. And the reality is, and this is why I keep saying, am I stupid? Is it's so far from the truth. It is so far from the truth. In fact, if you do everything in just a clinical manner, it isn't going to make you really that much better. You have to be able to go granular, right, and dive into those points a lot deeper. And that's when you get the breakout. That's when you can see, and we've done it many times, here's the Achilles here on Jolly Star. Boom. And it turns out to be correct afterwards, Ralphie. It's because you get granular.
Pride of Jenny is a prime example. We've nailed it all the way through.
You just get granular. And when you get granular, you start to see the weaknesses and strengths. It doesn't matter what happens. If this circumstance arrives, bang, it's a big negative. Or a positive.
All right. Well, look, because this is fun, and they're not going to be much faster next week. We're going to do a part 2 next week. I've decided this on the run. But so to finish the basis before we get some, there's so many other variables I want to talk to you about. So let's finish with this one, because it's such a big eyebrow raiser for everyone who hears it for the first time, because I want to get into it more. Why do you not use weight carried in your work?
Yeah, well, I'd say in parallel with when I was doing the sectionals, I was typically running 3 databases, other people's databases, spending, seriously, Ralphie, I'm a guy that's in my 30s, and I'm spending 25, 40 grand a year on other people's data, while I'm learning about sectional times and letting that build. This is what I was doing. And what was I doing with it? I'll tell you what I was doing. Not only am I learning about how everybody does things, is I was adjusting all these ratings with the weights and the class. That's what I was doing. All of them. Day in, day out, wherever I got a chance, whenever there was a downtime. Because obviously when I was younger it was a bit harder. You still got to provide for your family, and I was, at that time I wasn't courageous enough just to do that for a living. This is horse racing and nothing else. Definitely wasn't gutsy enough, or have the belief within myself that I was good enough. Probably more to the point, a bit older you realise that. But it allowed me a big educational process. I spent so much money, and all I was doing was tuning up. But then when I was going into practice, it wasn't working, and I'm trying to understand. But why isn't it working? I'm doing everything to the letter. Why isn't it working? Why? What's broken? Because that's the first thing I thought about. What's broken? Why can't it work? I'm using the class. I'm using the margins. I'm using the weights. minimum weights are, what the horses carry, what's the highest thing, and I would have all the theories. Oh, this horse, whenever it gets to carry more than 54, it's no good. Oh, if it's going to carry more than 58, 60, that's it, it's no good. And this is the thing. This is, again, coming back, looking inwards, right? Why is it no good? See, that's the thing. Why is it no good? Like, I like people say, when they say, oh, but he's carrying 60. Okay, why is the 60 no good? Explain it to me. Because when they're all out there in track work and all that, no one's carrying 55, 56, generally speaking. They're all carrying in the mid-high 60s, trials. You don't even know what weight they're carrying.
Heavy saddles, yeah.
Yeah, all these things, right?
Yep.
So I was doing what everybody else was doing. No different. And I was failing. And I was spending all this money. And I was failing. And that's okay. I didn't go there to spend all that money because I was going to get rich. I wanted to have all these databases and learn because I understood the value of investing in yourself. That I definitely understood. That was something that I got right. Whether I was intelligent enough and maybe I could have been more prudent and not spent as much money, that's different. It's just like if you like cars, you're always buying cars. Majority of the cars, they end up in the rust bucket, right? And they're worth nothing. And all you've done is just blown a whole bunch of money in your lifetime, right? But you got enjoyment out of it. And you can justify it. But at the end of the day, if you're looking strictly from a business point of view, it's pretty dumb, right? So this is the same thing. But what happened was through the collective of a couple of decades of doing that, and then as the sectional times I started to rise up and really understand, I started realizing class is bullshit. Class is all about a handicapper being able to do his work. So it's bullshit for me as a punter, but not bullshit for the industry. It's absolute must. Because without handicapping and having all these, you couldn't put on races. So that part's true. And I get it, right? That's the function of handicapping of classes. It allows for races to be put on a stage so then all of us can punt to it or watch it or whatever. The second part was through the prism of the sectional times. I started realising, the weights, I think it's a bit of bullshit here. Seeing horses that I would, and we've done it on in our podcast, Ralphie, even last season with some horses from Sydney, where they're 2 kilos higher than what they've ever carried. And yet, when I look at their acceleration, when they're carrying 6 kilos less, right, the difference over the last couple of 100 metres is less than a quarter of a length. So how does that work? Because, you see, this is understanding the weight scenario. So if you then just apply a weight to a rating, this is where the first fundamental flaw comes in. And even the class. This is where the flaws come into play. So you're distributing this weight. So if they're just cruising along and the horse gets an unimpeded run and he's carrying 62 kilos, his performance from 55 to 62 is going to be very, very little over the last couple of 100 metres in terms of variation. Now, I used to look at momograms and things like that about understanding the distribution of acceleration and deacceleration, what impact, and there is a part that weight can play. Absolutely, there's a part that weight can play, and it does play a role under those scenarios. And if the horse gets checked and blocked and it's got a high weight, it will have an impact. If it's on more inferior ground and it's been a testing run, it can have an impact. That is true, but it doesn't have an impact like how you would put it in a ratings method. And that's why I don't use it. It's not because I dismiss it and don't talk about it. I understand it's only a tool that you can weaponize in very isolated scenarios, and therefore I choose not to use it. And I have not used weights or class, Ralphie. I can tell you now for well over a decade. More. What am I saying? More than 15 years. I don't even use it. And I spent more than 20 years of my life adjusting everything with weights and classes. And this is why I say to you, how stupid am I?
But it's all part of learning too. If someone had said to you beforehand, at the start, don't do it, you wouldn't have believed them. So you have to go through that learning process for yourself, don't you?
Yeah, and you spend a couple of $100,000 over, a period of time. And you go, hey, Vinny, just make sure you don't tell Connie. I'll go to myself, yeah, well, she won't know. Don't worry about it. It's all good.
The one analogy I like using, and I remember late in Shane Crawford's great career for Hawthorn, he lost a couple of kilos because he felt it could, as he got older, he could cover the ground a bit easier. I go, okay. So then I started thinking about when I started working with you. So this is a human losing 2 kilos compared to a horse who's 6, 7, 8 times a 75 kilo human versus a 550 kilo animal. And people are saying that a kilo or two is going to make such a huge difference. I'm thinking there is no logic to that. So what you have to do, at very least, if you want to do it, is allow for the fact that this is a really big animal. So it's not 1 or 2 kilos from 55 kilos of the jockey's weight. It's 1 or 2 kilos from 550 kilos, including the horse's weight, because it has to carry its own weight.
And this is actually, you're right, Ralphie. And what an impact it actually has. Because a lot of these trainers talk about their racing weight. Many of them weigh them. It's not something that happens. They do weigh them. But even in recent times, we've seen that Simon Miller runner where the horse had come back, 40, 50 kilos bigger, but the horse was already fit. Now, that can have an impact. And sometimes, and this is another part of the learning process, is that why did that horse never run to those levels anymore? Why was the horse genuinely a length or two behind what it used to be able to do? Now, that could have something to do with the horse 50 kilos heavier and got a bit slower.
Yeah, because even though it's muscle, it's not just like the Ethiopian runners, the great African champion middle distance runners. They're not carrying muscle.
No, and so this is the power. If we were in a scenario where we were looking at, we had it in our form. Here's the weight of the horse when they arrive to the track, and they get weighed, and that was published. Then all of a sudden, we would talk a lot more about the weight. We'd be talking about the collective weight of the horse. We wouldn't be talking about the micro. We'd talk the collective. And and again, it's another great thing in learning. But you're right, Ralphie. That's exactly how it all works from my perspective. And I have done it with tremendous success where I don't even look at the weights. I don't look at the classes anymore. And I did do a study for one of the racing bodies 3-4 years ago, 5-6 years of data and broken all down, and we did it in the benchmark. And I realised that when I did that, I didn't even know this myself, right? It actually had its own scale, and there was some truism how it lined up with some of the different group races, and that's off its own back, off times, no other scale. It's crazy, but.
There we go. All right. Well, the bells rang. That's the end of our school for this week. So we're going to do another one next week because there's so many other areas of this fascinating caper I didn't talk to you about, which I want to, and that's before the horses get a lot faster. We did see some glimpses of real talent on Saturday. Cosmic Crusader and So You Pence at Cosmic Crusader, of course, returning at Caulfield. In Sydney, there was Sir Les, Hawker Hall, and So You Pence that were quite impressive, and a couple of little trials. So we're going to do that as the members bonus this week. So as always, we're not got any affiliation with corporate bookmakers. We're here because we've got fantastic members, and if you want to join in and get our members bonuses, and there's going to be some gold coming up in the big races, just click through the links to my website, racetrackralphie.com.au. For $5 a week, you can get the members bonuses, roughly $5 a week, in all of course Vince Cardi's work that we've just been discussing via dailysectionals.com.au. Thanks for listening to Year-Round Carnival. Next week, part 2, as we look at other aspects of this fascinating caper.